I bet on myself and I am winning. It is episode 66 of For Our Edification. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of For Our Edification. I'm Eddie Francis, and For Our Edification is your personal leadership podcast where we have conversations and I share some thoughts about personal growth and development so that you and I can leverage our identities to be of value to those around us. For Our Edification is brought to you by Edify Ventures, LLC. So your organization doesn't have anybody leading your marketing and communications efforts right now? Don't put your brand on pause. Ask about Edify's fractional chief marketing and communications officer services today. Go to eddiefrancis.com for more information. And past episodes of For Our Edification are also available at eddiefrancis.com, also YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So part 3 of the Potting with Potapalooza series is going to continue. My guest is going to be a guy by the name of Randy Farris. But in the meantime, there was something that was really on my brain. In 2023, I decided to bet on myself and start a business. And oh boy, have I learned a lot. So I'm going to tell you the 5 biggest things that I have learned about betting on myself. I can't wait to share. The views and opinions expressed on For Our Edification do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the hosts, guests, or any entities with which we are affiliated. So you've heard me tell this story before. I've told it on an earlier episode of For Our Edification. And I'm really trying to decide how I'm going to do this. So I have been watching, by the way, a lot of really cool, deep Black leadership folks on social media. And I've noticed something. They're very polished and professional, and they have mugs. So if you're watching this podcast, I have a mug so that I can look serious and like a leader. Okay, that's not going to work. Or I could do it another way. I could be very deep. So I could be Will Smith deep on this. So I can talk about the things that have been really in me, and those feelings, that anger, it was packed inside of me like a jar of peanut butter, not just any peanut butter, but the peanut butter with the jelly stripes, So no, that's probably not going to work either. All right, let me just tell the story. So in 2023, and I've told this story before, I was let go from a job that I loved. I was crazy about this job. I was a director of communications and marketing at a university, Dillard University. And I felt like I had just gotten into my groove. And we got a new president, and the president wanted to go in a different direction as far as marketing and communications. Now, I knew that this was a possibility. I know how it goes whenever a company gets a new CEO. I know how it goes when a radio station gets a new general manager or a new program director. I know what it's like when a college or a university gets a new president. But the thing is that I had to be realistic about something. The day that was my last day on that job, April 10th, 2023, I get home and I'm talking to my wife, and Halima asked me a very important question that day. She asked me, are you going to apply for another job? Now I'm sitting there thinking, of course I'm going to apply for another job. I mean, I gotta keep the cash flow going in this house. I got to do my part. Why would I not look for another job? And she said, okay, let me ask you this question another way. If you were to get another job like this one, are you going to flip tables your first week there? And I said, yep, I am going to flip tables my first week. And she said, okay, listen, instead of doing this to yourself again, what do you really want to do? And that question stopped me in my tracks. And I had to think about it. And I realized that I wanted to go out on my own. I wanted to start a business because I had a business idea that I thought would work. And it's interesting because earlier that day, I had spoken to the director of HR, and she and I had developed this great relationship. So she decided to have a very real conversation with me. And she said, listen, this is your last day. And you need to think about your reputation, how this situation may follow you, and what are you going to do? She says, so what are you thinking? And it's so funny because I had forgotten just that quickly that I told the director of HR at the time, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm gonna do something myself. And she goes, okay. And so I think the reason that my thoughts were so jumbled was number one, a pretty obvious reason. I was upset that day. I was very, very upset. I knew I was stressed. I knew I was burned out. I knew I needed to change the scenery, but I wanted to leave on my own terms. And I was upset that I did not leave on my own terms. But the other thing was, I had so much work that I wanted to do over the next 5 years at this university. And I had a plan that I had been working out. And so that was really a problem for me. When I thought about why it is I said I'm going to bet on myself, there were three things that were really inside of me at that time, inside of my brain, that I wanted to address. The first thing that I wanted to address as a motivation for betting on myself was that I needed to decompress from that situation. Listen, I had gained weight. I had started drinking a lot. I was eating just horribly at the time. My schedule at the time was I would get home from work at about 5:30, 6 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock. The first thing I would do is I would pour myself a drink. And then I would have dinner and I would have another drink, maybe dessert too. And so here's where the weight gain came in. And we're talking about this happening for like 8, 9 months straight. This was the routine. Now, it's not like I wasn't doing that before that situation, but it intensified. And not only that, I was also motivated by the fact that I had had a couple of panic attacks. One time I was on a telehealth call and I told this doctor that I was having heart palpitations. And he said, you know, you could be having a heart attack. You need to get to the emergency room. I get to the emergency room and everything was fine. So I came to the conclusion that I was having a panic attack, but it was my second one. The first one that I had was in my office and I thought I was having a heart attack then. So health was the first thing that I thought about when I said I need to bet on myself. And then the other thing that I thought about was I had, as I mentioned, this big business idea. The big idea is that higher education, and I say this all the time, higher ed has a hiring problem. People in higher ed cannot hire their way out of a paper bag a lot of times. People are hiring their friends, they're hiring people in their fraternities and their sororities, not because they have the skill, but because they're in their fraternities and sororities. I see this at HBCUs all the time. And then you have people who are hiring folks because they have, quote unquote, the right degree. They have the degree from the, quote unquote, right institution. A lot of times people are getting hired for job for any reasons besides they can actually show evidence that they are good at what they do. You can sit in a doggone interview, and I know this from having served on search committees. You can sit in an interview for a lot of colleges and universities, and you can prove without a shadow of a doubt that you were the person for the job, and they will pass over you because they're just thinking about some other crap, right? And so one of the things that I had been thinking was I had two skill sets that could address that. One, I had been in talent acquisition, and two, marketing and communications. And so this practice that I know very well, like the back of my hand, is employer branding. And higher ed needs employer branding so bad. Not trying to put a lipstick on a pig, by the way. And I don't want to belabor the point about this business idea. but but I'm very passionate about it. It's not about putting lipstick on a pig. It's not about putting a nice brand out there and people still do their crazy crap behind closed doors. This is about wanting to put lipstick on a pig and using the lipstick to examine the pig. That's what this is about. And that's what branding can do, right? And employer branding forces you to examine your practices, your hiring practices, your talent acquisition practice, your talent experience practices, and your talent retention. All right, that's enough about that. So, yeah, second motivation, my big business idea. The third motivation was probably the biggest one. And it was one that didn't hit me until probably a month later. And that is my identity was tied heavily to what I was and not who I am. It was tied heavily to my job and not who Eddie Francis is. When I was a student in high school, at the greatest high school in the history of mankind, yes, Lord, St. Augustine High School, New Orleans, Louisiana, Rise Sons of Gold and Purple, Mighty Purple Knights. I had a theology teacher, the late Father Patrick McCarthy. And in one of our classes, he said something that has stuck with me and has guided a lot of my professional decisions. He said, fellas, there's a difference between who you are and what you are. What you are the choices that you make. It's your decision to attend this high school. It's the decision you're going to make to go to college, and the decision that you're going to make about what college you go to. That's in your control. It's the career you choose. It's even the religion you choose. That's what you are. But who you are is based on how you were raised, your personality traits, the values that you learn. And you can change who you are. But the thing is that who you are is much more organic. He didn't necessarily use those words in that language, but that's what I got from what he said. And so after a couple of weeks of thinking about it, I realized that I had started to become so married to this idea of becoming a vice president of marketing and communications at a university. My identity was tied heavily into that. I had become so cool with the higher ed marketing and communications community around the country. That's where I had sunken so much of my identity. And so in doing that, I started to ignore who Eddie Francis is exactly. And so here I am in year number 3 of this business, and I'm still betting on myself. The reason this hit me the way it did, and I wanted to roll out this episode, is recently the horrible news has hit us in media and on social media that among the job loss in the US over the past couple of months in 2025, or past few months, I should say, 300,000 of those people were Black women. People who looked up one day and lost their jobs because some jerk off decided that he had better ideas. So with these people, all of these folks around the US who are now out of work, I can only imagine there are a lot of them right now, or a lot of you, because odds are, if you're listening to this, you probably are someone who's saying, I'm going to bet on myself and open my business. And so if you are one of those people, I can only imagine that in betting on yourself, especially if you've worked for the government for years, this is scary. And you're trying to figure out how this is going to work out for you. And so let me first of all say this. You are probably so much better at what you do than you think you are. You have probably been doing it on autopilot for so long as a government employee, or you probably know it so well that is just part of you. And you don't realize that there's something that you know that a lot of other people don't know. And so you have value. You have value in the market. But this is going to be a huge learning experience for you. And let me tell you 5 things that I have learned about myself and betting on myself that I really hope can help you on your journey in betting on yourself. And the first thing that I will say is this, and you are probably going to think I am insane for saying this, but personal branding is a real thing. That is the number one thing that I learned about betting on myself. So I know if you are thinking about personal branding and what it sounds like and how you've seen people blog about it and vlog about it, you are probably sitting there going, oh, goodness, this is just some cheap tactic to make sure I'm seen more. So let me just say this as someone who actually understands what the branding process looks like. Okay, I've done this work. Branding is not something you do for them. People see your identity and value through the branding process that you are doing. And it is very much an internal process. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As a matter of fact, I had the pleasure of working with a marketing agency called Ology out of Columbus, Ohio, when I did a huge brand refresh project with Dillard University. And there's something that Bill Faust, who is the president of Ology, says that is probably my favorite branding quote of them all. And he says, how well a brand is delivered externally depends on how well it is understood internally. Think about that for a second. Think about that, because when the branding process starts, the first thing you take a look at would be your mission, your vision, your values. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Where are you headed? What do you stand for? That's where it all starts. That's internal work. And you actually have to answer some hard questions along the way. Because once you start digging into what it is you really, really stand for and who it is you really are, the things that you have probably been trying to do professionally, they probably don't match up with what you've been standing for personally. And that is a hard place to be, because now you have to reconcile that. And now you have to ask yourself, well, when I talk to people about who I am and what I stand for, do I mean it? Especially if this is what I do, if this is my discipline. So with me, when I decided that I was going to start this business, the first thing I did is I started examining my personal brand very closely. I took about a week, 2 weeks to journal, to ask myself a lot of questions, to even like talk out loud to myself about what it is that really, what is it that made me stay up at night and what is it that made me get up in the morning? What were those two things? I realized that in order for me to really bet on myself, developing a personal brand was a real thing that I needed to do. And it did help me figure out how I wanted to focus on delivering value to my customers. Second thing that I have learned in betting on myself is that resilience is everything. You are going to have ups and downs. People are going to love your product. They're going to hate your product or your service. And some people are going to like you and they are going to dislike you personally. And oh, by the way, in this journey, you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to do things that are going to make people go, why did you do that again? Wait, what are we doing? I thought you said that blah, blah. Wait, how? What? That is going to happen. And so you have to be ready for that. You have to be ready to bounce back from that. And you have to bounce back, because the sooner you can bounce back from the mistakes that you make, the sooner you can bounce back from misreading situations, or the sooner you can bounce back from dealing with that client who is just really not the client you probably should have had in the first place. The sooner you can do that, the sooner you can get back to business and you can get back on the horse and do what it is that you want to do and make some money. The third thing that I learned in betting on myself is that confidence is critical. I am one of those people who has struggled with imposter syndrome. I have sat in rooms and I've asked myself, do I even belong here? And a big part of that is the way that, quite frankly, it is the way that I have come up in my career. You know, I am one of those people who, when I started my career, I was one of the youngest people, if not the youngest person around the place. And so I got picked on, right? I was the rookie. I got picked on. I get into higher education. And let me tell you something, in higher ed, it is really easy for imposter syndrome to settle in because in higher ed, people are obsessed with what degree you have. What kind of doctorate do you have? If you have a doctorate, where did you get it? Did you graduate from the right place? Do you come from the right city, from the right part of the country? And yes, people do ask, even in marginalized institutions, people will ask if you are the right ethnicity or the right color. Yes. And all of that is a recipe for imposter syndrome. And you know what I've decided? Hell no, I'm not dealing with imposter syndrome anymore. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Because if I'm in the room, damn it, I belong in the room. No, I'm not doing that anymore. Confidence is critical. Here's a fourth thing that I have learned about betting on myself, and that is know how to adjust. We're always going to have to adjust something. That is a given. But the thing that I have realized is understanding how to do it. As it relates to personal leadership, um, I wanted to understand what the biggest leadership challenges were. So I reviewed 50 articles online about leadership and leadership challenges. The most consistent thing that I have seen that is a challenge for people in leadership positions is adjusting to change. And so if adjusting to change is that much of a problem, the big challenge is figuring out how to adjust to the change that happens. One thing that I have seen people do when they have bet on themselves and they've gone in a direction and it is a mistake is I've seen people become really rigid about that bet that they made on themselves because they have thinking to themselves, I suppose that I have got to be right about this. I decided I'm going to go in this direction, so I'm going to go in this direction, and I'm not changing this. This is the way forward for me. This is my motivation. I got to do it this way. Or I think maybe in some cases, maybe people are obsessed with making it look good for social media because they're thinking to themselves, well, I've been telling people on social media, this is what I'm going to do. This I'm going to bet on myself. And so, no, I'm part of hustle culture right now. So I got to hustle. And if I got to hustle just to show people that that I bet on myself the right way, then that's what I got to do. Or maybe the issue that these people have is that they are very much terrified of failing. And so they get really rigid about what it is that they're doing and the direction that they're going. But you can't be so rigid that when you have to adjust, you don't know how to adjust. You got to be really flexible. And here is the fifth thing that I've learned about betting on myself, and that is success is a team sport. So I need you to do me a favor here. If you would, I need you to clean all that stuff off your couch right now if you're at home. Move the pillows, move the blanket, and don't worry about the food that's in the middle of the sofa. I'm not going to worry about that because I need to lie on your sofa right now, and we need to talk. No, I need to talk, and you need to listen. Okay, so here's the deal. There's this fallacy that I have grown up with, and that is needing help is an admission of incompetence. That is a huge fallacy I grew up with. I grew up in a high achieving environment. both of my parents were high achievers, both had master's degrees. My dad was a music and English teacher, but, really creative. Um, and so for him, his high achievement was right there with creativity, but having a little fun, achieving along the way. My mother, um, as a balance to my dad, which they were great together. And my mother was someone who was also very high achieving, math and science. The world could be very black and white to her. I'll never forget this. And this stuck with me for years. And I had to get to a point where I had to figure out what the situation was when she said this to me. But when I was like 11, 12 years old, I was with my mom at work, and work was very stressful for her. And I was trying to work on a math problem, and it was something that just it wasn't making sense in the problem. And I knew the process to solve this math problem, but it was just giving me fits. And so my mother was in the middle of doing something, and she was working on some stuff. I think she was she was doing some database work. And she was just really stressed out when I asked her this question. But I said, Ma, how do I solve this problem? And my mother, without even looking at me, goes, how could you ask me a stupid question like that? And so hearing that at 11, 12 years old, that rocked my little world. Now, of course, I got to the point where I realized again what the situation was. My mother was a high achiever. She was very, very sweet. And she was cool as all get out. But that point, I got on her nerves. And I understood. I understood the situation, but for years it just stuck with me. And I didn't want to ask for help after that. I never want to ask anybody for help ever. I could be, stuck on the biggest problem in the world, not know my way around it, through it, or into it. And I'm sitting there going, no, I got to solve it myself. And by the way, right now I have not a love hate relationship, but a hate relationship straight up with the term you should know that because of that incident. Because I hate it when people ask a question, or I hate it when someone responds to a question, you should know that. And it's like, yo, the person is asking this question because they want to know the answer. Whether they know the answer, whether you think they should know the answer or not, just give them the damn answer. Help them out. Goodness gracious. All right. Not unless there's been some agreement of what someone should know at a certain point, whatever the hell that is. I mean, I'm in a fraternity, so that's the secrets of the rituals of the organization. That is something we should know. But if it's something that someone is asking and they're just trying to make sure that they level set the information and what's happening at the time, damn, just help them out. Stop being a. But anyway, but I'll tell you the moment that really helped me realize that success is a team sport. And that was when I had my last director position. There was a specialist position that I hired for. And I know the person who I tell this story about. If she's ever heard me tell this story, I know she's probably sick of hearing me tell this story publicly. But there was this position that I hired for, and there was a gap of about 2 months before I filled the position. So I wound up doing that work myself. And in doing the work, I realized that there were some cheat codes and some tricks that really made the work jump out and made it, really pop. So I hired this new specialist. She comes in and we do these one-on-one meetings. I did these bi-weekly one-on-one meetings. And so in doing this one-on-one meeting, the first, like maybe the first month that she was in a position, or the first couple of months she was in a position, I would sit there and just go over the tricks of the trade that I learned and the cheat codes that I learned and all this stuff. And I'm going, yeah, see, now if you do this and you do that, so I'm just getting all excited about it, right? So excited about it. And then I noticed that her body language was always kind of shut down and closed off. Clearly, she was not impressed with my cheat codes. And then I realized something. I was micromanaging this woman. And that was annoying her. And what was really the problem was that I wanted to kind of shine because I was so pleased with myself and what I had learned. And I thought I had it figured out. In one meeting, I just stopped and I asked her, "What do you think?" And when she got the chance to talk and to really give her ideas, she did way more with that position than I could have thought. And so it was at that point, after that meeting, when she finally got a chance to talk, that I sat in my office and I thought to myself, well, Eddie, if you could do it all, why do you need them? The success of this team is about the success of just that, the team. And your success depends on them as well. So you need to trust them and let them do their jobs. And in betting on myself, I have learned that I can't do it all by myself. The first investment that I have made has paid off handsomely, and it was getting a bookkeeper. Shouts out to Etch Management, my girl Yakima. It has paid off handsomely. I mean, she has kept me straight. She has given me wise counsel. She is doing stuff that I could not have done by myself. And so as I continue to grow and I continue to bet on myself, these are 5 things that I really hope mean something to you, especially if you're someone who is betting on yourself. Yes, personal branding is a real thing. Resilience is everything. Confidence most definitely is critical. Know how to adjust and don't be afraid to adjust. And then the other thing is success is a team sport. So let me close out with one leadership for good thought, a quick thought, and that is betting on yourself is an adventure. It is a roller coaster ride, emotionally and mentally. But you want to know the biggest part of winning that bet? The biggest part of winning that bet is realizing that you have to enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for joining with me and bearing with me on this episode of For Our Edification. Hey, if you like what you hear, share this episode, like the podcast, and rate it on your favorite platform. Also, talk to me. Holla at your boy on social media. You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Eddie Francis. You can connect with me on Facebook at Eddie Francis Unscripted. And you can find me at Eddie Francis 06 on Threads, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, or Fanbase. For Dr. Halim Malik Francis, I'm Eddie Francis. Again, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of For Our Edification.